In this interconnected digital world, there are going to be opportunities for hackers to engage in cyber assaults both in the private sector and the public sector. Now, our first order of business is making sure that we do everything to harden sites and prevent those kinds of attacks from taking place. When I came into office, I stood up a cybersecurity interagency team to look at everything that we could do at the government level to prevent these kinds of attacks. We've been coordinating with the private sector, but a lot more needs to be done. We're not even close to where we need to be. And one of the things in the new year that I hope Congress is prepared to work with us on is strong cyber security laws that allow for information sharing across private sector platforms as well as the public sector, so that we are incorporating best practices and preventing these attacks from happening in the first place. But even as we get better, the hackers are going to get better too. Some of them are going to be state actors. Some of them are going to be non-state actors. All of them are going to be sophisticated, and many of them can do some damage. We cannot have a society in which some dictator someplace can start imposing censorship here in the United States. They caused a lot of damage, and we will respond. We will respond proportionally, and we'll respond in a place and time and manner that we choose. It's not something that I will announce here today at a press conference. More broadly, though, this points to the need for us to work with the international community to start setting up some very clear rules of the road in terms of how the Internet and cyber operates. Right now, it's sort of the Wild West. And part of the problem is you've got weak states that can engage in these kinds of attacks. You've got non-state actors that can do enormous damage. That's part of what makes this issue of cybersecurity so urgent. Again, this is part of the reason why it's going to be so important for Congress to work with us and get an actual bill passed that allows for the kind of information sharing we need. Because if we don't put in place the kind of architecture that can prevent these attacks from taking place, this is not just going to be affecting movies. This is going to be affecting our entire economy in ways that are extraordinarily significant.
Now right to the White House and new details about those computers in the West Wing hacked. What was on them, and who do they think was behind the cyber attack? ABC senior justice correspondent Pierre Thomas live in Washington tonight. Pierre, what do we know?
David, there's still some disruptions to that White House computer network because security officials are still cleaning out the electronic infection. And while this network does not have classified information on it, the breach is so serious that the FBI, the NSA, and the Secret Service are investigating.
So no classified information, but Pierre, do they have any idea who was behind it?
Sources say the primary suspects are Russian hackers tied to that nation's government. One theory that they're retaliating due to U.S. support for economic sanctions because of Russia's suspected role in the Ukrainian conflict. Also, Russian hackers are suspected of targeting NATO, the World Bank, and U.S. defense companies. Sources say the new breach fits that pattern, David.
All right, Pierre Thomas with us tonight. Pierre, thanks as always.
That cyber attack on J.P. Morgan Chase. With a bank this big, it raises big questions about the safety of personal accounts and national security. ABC's Chief Justice Correspondent Pierre Thomas is tracking it all from Washington. Good morning, Pierre.
Good morning, George. Today, one of the nation's biggest banks has been hacked, and this morning, the FBI and the Secret Service are investigating.
Law enforcement sources tell ABC News federal agents are investigating a potential major breach of J.P. Morgan Chase's computers and those of at least one other major financial institution. Investigators are trying to determine whether sensitive customer account information is among what was compromised. Company and government officials declined to offer specifics, but last night the FBI released a statement saying it and the Secret Service were working to determine the scope of recently reported cyber attacks against several financial institutions. One official told ABC News that when a bank the size of J.P. Morgan Chase is targeted, it's not just considered a financial crime, but also potentially a national security matter. Investigators will look to see whether organized crime rings were involved and whether the attack originated in Russia.
now to what's being called one of the largest cyber attacks ever discovered at a financial institution. J.P. Morgan Chase says it is now working with federal law enforcement officials to determine the full scope of a massive data breach believed to have impacted about, ready for this, 76 million households and 7 million small businesses, which is far more than the number of customers affected in recent breaches at both Target and Home Depot. The nation's largest bank disclosed the full details of the breach yesterday, with the number of customers drastically higher than what was initially estimated in July when J.P. Morgan first made the discovery. Among those affected are customers who use Chase and J.P. Morgan online or those mobile apps.
Nothing has ever changed the world as quickly as the Internet has. Less than a decade ago, we went down to the Pentagon to do a story on something called information warfare, or cyber war, as some people called it then. It involved using computers and the Internet as weapons. Much of it was still theory, but we were told that before too long, it might be possible for a hacker with a computer to disable critical infrastructure in a major city and disrupt essential services, to steal millions of dollars from banks all over the world, to infiltrate defense systems, extort millions from public companies, and even sabotage our weapons systems. Today, it is not only possible, all of that has actually happened, plus a lot more we don't even know about. It's why President Obama has made cyber war defense a top national priority, and why, as we first reported in November, some people are already saying that the next big war is less likely to begin with a bang than a blackout.
Can you imagine your life without electric power? When the president rolled out his...
Until February 2009, retired Admiral Mike McConnell was the nation's top spy. As Chief of National Intelligence, he oversaw the Central Intelligence Agency, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and the National Security Agency. Few people know as much about cyber warfare and our dependency on the power grid and the computer networks that deliver our oil and gas, pump and purify our water, keep track of our money, and operate our transportation systems.
If I were an attacker and I wanted to do strategic damage to the United States, I would either take the cold of winter or the heat of summer. I probably would attack electric power on the U.S. East Coast, maybe the West Coast, and attempt to cause a cascading effect. All of those things are in the art of the possible from a sophisticated attacker.
Do you believe our adversaries have the capability of bringing down a power grid?
I do.
Is the U.S. prepared for such an attack?
No, the United States is not prepared for such an attack.
It's now clear this cyber threat is one of the most serious economic and national security challenges we face as a nation.
4 months after taking office, President Obama made those concerns part of our national defense policy, declaring the country's digital infrastructure a strategic asset and confirming that cyber warfare had moved beyond theory.
We know that cyber intruders have probed our electrical grid, and that in other countries, cyber attacks have plunged entire cities into darkness.
President Obama didn't say which country had been plunged into darkness, but a half a dozen sources in the military, intelligence, and private security communities have told us the president was referring to Brazil. Several prominent intelligence sources confirmed that there were a series of cyber attacks in Brazil, one north of Rio de Janeiro in January of 2005 that affected 3 cities and tens of thousands of people, and another much larger event beginning on September 26, 2007. That one, in the state of Espírito Santo, affected more than 3 million people in dozens of cities over a 2-day period, causing major disruptions. In Vitoria, the world's largest iron ore producer had 7 plants knocked offline, costing the company $7 million. It is not clear who did it or what the motive was, but the people who do these sorts of things are no longer teenagers making mischief. They're now likely to be highly trained soldiers with the Chinese army, or part of an organized crime group in Russia, Europe, or the Americas.
They can disrupt critical infrastructure, wipe databases. We know they can rob banks, so it's a much bigger and more serious threat.
Jim Lewis is a director at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and he led a group that prepared a major report on cybersecurity for President Obama. What was it that made the government begin to take this seriously?
In 2007, we probably had our electronic Pearl Harbor. It was an espionage Pearl Harbor. some unknown foreign power, and honestly we don't know who it is, broke into the Department of Defense, to the Department of State, the Department of Commerce, probably the Department of Energy, probably NASA. They broke into all of the high-tech agencies, all of the military agencies, and downloaded terabytes of information. So
Terabytes?
A terabyte is, it's hard to say, the Library of Congress, which has millions of volumes, is about 12 terabytes. So we probably lost the equivalent of a Library of Congress worth of government information in 2007.
All stolen by foreign countries.
Yeah, this was a serious attack, and that's really what made people wake up and say, hey, we've got to get a grip on this.
But since then, there has been an even more serious breach of computer security, which Lewis called the most significant incident ever publicly acknowledged by the Pentagon. Last November, someone was able to get past the firewalls and encryption devices of one of the most sensitive U.S. military computer systems and stay inside for several days.
This was the CENTCOM network, the command that's fighting our two wars. And some foreign power was able to get into their networks and sit there and see everything they did.
What do you mean sit there?
They could see what the traffic was, they could read documents, they could interfere with things. It was like they were part of the American military command.
Lewis believes it was done by foreign spies who left corrupted thumbnail drives or memory sticks lying around in places where U.S. military personnel were likely to pick them up. As soon as someone inserted one into a CENTCOM computer, a malicious code opened a back door for the foreign power to get into the system. So presumably nobody at the Pentagon is plugging in...
They've banned them.
My impression is most people understand that there is a threat out there. I don't think most people understand that there are incidents that are happening.
Yeah, I've been trying to figure out why that is, and some of it is the previous administration didn't want to admit that they had been rolled in 2007. There's a disincentive to tell people, hey, things are going badly. But it doesn't seem to be sinking in, and some of us call it the death of 1,000 cuts. Every day, a little bit more of our intellectual property, our innovative skills, our military technology is stolen by somebody. And it's like little drops. Eventually we'll drown, but every day we don't notice.
Congress has noticed allocating $17 billion for a top-secret national cybersecurity initiative, and the Department of Defense has nominated Lieutenant General Keith Alexander, head of the NSA, to run a new military command devoted to offensive and defensive cyber war. How much of this are we doing? We, meaning the United States.
We're in the top of the league, you know. We're as good as anyone.
So whatever foreign countries are doing to the United States is doing to them.
We are in the top of the league. We are really good. And if you talk to the Russians or the Chinese, they say, how can you complain about us when you do exactly the same thing? It's a fair point with one exception. We have more to steal. We have more to lose. We're the place that depends on the Internet. We've done the most to take advantage of it. We're the ones who've woven it into our economy and to our national security in ways that they haven't. So we are more vulnerable.
Even the country's most powerful weapons are targets. So technicians at the Sandia National Laboratories make their own microchips for nuclear weapons and other sophisticated systems.
This is
Jim Gosler, one of the fathers of cyber war, says most commercial chips are now made abroad, and there are concerns that someone overseas could tamper with them. So you're worried about somebody being able to get in and reprogram a nuclear weapon or get inside and put something in there that would make
certainly alter its functionality.
What do you mean by alter its functionality?
Such that when the weapon needed to be to go operational, it wouldn't work.
Have you found microchips that have been altered?
We have found microelectronics and electronics embedded in applications that they shouldn't be there. And it's very clear that a foreign intelligence service put them there.
There are thousands of attempted attacks every single day, tens of thousands of attacks.
Sean Henry's job is to police potential targets all over the United States. He is an assistant director of the FBI in charge of the Bureau's cyber division. He told us that criminals have used the Internet to steal more than $100 million from U.S. banks so far this year, and they did it without ever having to draw a gun or pass a note to a teller. The FBI became famous stopping bank robberies. Are there more bank robberies in terms of the amount of money stolen on the Internet than there are guys walking into branches?
Absolutely.
With guns?
Yes.
Really?
I've seen attacks where there's been $10 million lost in one 24-hour period. If that had happened in a bank robbery where people walked in with guns blazing, that would have been headline news all over the world.
And the bank probably didn't want it known.
Certainly, when there's a network breach, the owners of the network are not keen to have it known that their network was breached because of their concern that it might impact their business.
The case Henry mentioned didn't involve just one bank, it involved 130, all of them victimized through an international network of ATMs.
Well, Neil, according to a report issued by the DHS Industrial Control Systems Cyber Emergency Response Team, it's a mouthful, there was a sophisticated hack on a U.S. public utility recently. We don't have the specifics about which company and when they were targeted, but here's what we do know. DHS does acknowledge there was unauthorized access to the utility, but says it was able to work with the affected entity before there was any actual access to the utility's operations. Now, generally, we do not publicly hear about attacks like this one, but in this case, it was actually part of a report issued by DHS. And an interesting side note, investigators believe that the utility had likely been hit by previous attacks or probes. The security of public utilities, electric grids, all of that has been of growing concern across the country and on Capitol Hill, where they've been hearing testimony about this. It appears that this latest intrusion on a public utility was done via an internet entry point, something that would allow employee access into the actual control systems. The entry did have password protection, but that apparently did not stop the hacker or hackers. Last year, by the way, the Industrial Control Systems Cyber Emergency Response Team worked on more than 250 similar incidents. Some of the weakness seems to stem from the fact that many of these electric grids and utilities were designed long ago, long before internet access was so common, and now trying to integrate the old and new technology often leaves gaps. That is putting more pressure than ever on these industries to catch up and to do it quickly. Neil?
Yeah, time is a waste. And Shannon, thank you very, very much. So how serious is this? What's being done about it? Bob Strang is the former co-chair of the New York Anti-Terrorism Task Force. David Kennedy, well, he's a hacker, trained hacker. That exposes cyber threats and knows of what he speaks. Gentlemen, welcome to both of you. Robert, this is scary because left out in this coverage is the fact that we've had a number of other incidents, some involving just getting into the energy sector. More than half the cyber attacks were in the energy sector, so that must be a very popular target.
Well, it's popular not only in the United States but around the world, and it's popular because hackers and especially terrorists want to be able to learn more about our infrastructure, be able to get in and see what's available for them. That's the scary part. It doesn't necessarily mean that every time they go inside one of our systems, whether it be in a nuclear facility, whether it be in any of our utilities, whether it be in any of our gas or oil stations, they're looking for information. They're looking for intelligence. And the problem is that as they collect this data, as they increase their intelligence, how are they going to use it? Are they going to coordinate it in some way with other active events? Are they going to use it in and of itself? That's the issue, because sometimes not doing something, just going inside, it's like a thief coming in your home, looking around and seeing what is there so that they can plan for the big event. It's the same thing when they go inside these systems. They're looking around, they're seeing what's available, and they're planning for something, and that's the scary part.
Well, see, that's what worries me, David. I mean, in a lot of these cases, few though that we have officially reported, they don't destroy stuff. I know in the California utilities, substation equipment and the like was destroyed, but it was like a surgical strike, and they left before authorities arrived. But in some of these other cases, it seems to be getting into the brains of the utility and figuring out, to David's point, how it works, or Robert's point, how it works. What do you make of that? What should we fear because of that?
Well, these are just incursions that are looking at how we actually operate in the country. I mean, when we talk about industrial control systems, these things are ancient. You're talking technology that dates back into the 70s, and they haven't been upgraded. They're on the internet. And so these incursions are really happening from different known, what we call state-sponsored attacks. So things like China or Iran or Russia, learning our infrastructure so that they have the preparedness to come in and take out a large part of our infrastructure in the event that there is an actual altercation. So I think this is a really big concern for us because we're really not up to speed when it comes to the security around these type of devices or in any type of utility, oil, gas, you name it. We're really unprepared to be able to handle these type of threats or attacks. And this is just one example of, it was mentioned earlier, 250 plus attacks that happened last year. And this is a major front of attack for hackers, and we're seeing breaches happen all over the place. This is a major one for military operations.
Yeah, and it's also a major security thing. But as you pointed out in the past, Robert, when we're so focused on target or whether our security or credit data was compromised at a retail store, it's a whole nother beast when it's our utilities, and you think about forcing a power outage or a nationwide blackout. I mean, the way this system works, it's very easy to do.
It is, and if you combine that with these other technological security breaches, whether it be in the TSA, whether it be with our financial district, whether it be with any of our nuclear facilities, our water supply, we had 24 different entities listed when we did the Task Force Terrorism list here in New York 12 years ago, and they're all still very vulnerable. There's not much that we can do except build those firewalls, try to be more aggressive with our counterterrorism.
But what if it's antiquated, right? I mean, if these are some antiquated systems and they're not up to speed, a smart criminal can be ahead of that.
Well, look at what they're doing today with Target. Look at what the Chinese are doing to us. I mean, we're so far behind even with the latest technology that we have. These hackers, and David would probably agree, many of these terrorists, many of our people who want to harm the United States, they can gain access.
And a grid is the way to do it, right, David? I mean, you may compromise that. It's a heck of a lot different than going after your credit card data at a Target, right?
That's absolutely right. I mean, the financial impact is relatively low. But, I mean, think about, say we decided to launch an attack against Iran or another country, and they toppled our entire electrical grid where we have no power to any of our systems here back in the United States. I mean, you're talking a large portion of the United States that doesn't have the capability to communicate.
But who's doing that, David? Who do you suspect has the wherewithal, the knowledge to do this?
Well, Neil, the scary part about it is that the sophistication of these attacks aren't that great. It literally would take a college person that had just learned hacking to actually break into these industrial control systems. They're that vulnerable. Wow. But when we look at where they're actually originating from, they're originating from China, they're originating from Russia, they're originating from Iran. By the way, Iran's capabilities are starting to mirror a lot of what we see happening out of China now. So they're the next big threat, I think, moving forward, and really need to pay attention to what Iran's doing. They just recently claimed that they reverse engineered our drone and are able to produce the same type of drones. They have a very capable information warfare capability, and we should be pretty alarmed about it.
Well, I hear Iran, I hear China, I hear Russia, Robert. I don't like what I'm hearing.
2 years ago, a computer virus called Stuxnet infected and damaged the Iranian nuclear program. And that may sound like a good thing, but we are now learning this type of cyber attack could also be used against us. Last night on 60 Minutes, correspondent Steve Kroft reported on this new cyber warfare battle.
Few people know more about the dark military art of cyber war than retired General Michael Hayden. He's a former head of the National Security Agency and was CIA director under George W. Bush. He knows a lot more about the attack on Iran than he can say here.
This was a good idea, all right? But I also admit this was a really big idea, too. The rest of the world is looking at this and saying, clearly someone has legitimated this kind of activity as acceptable international conduct. The whole world is watching.
The story of what we know about the Stuxnet virus begins in June of 2010, when it was first detected and isolated by a tiny company in Belarus after one of its clients in Iran complained about a software glitch. Within a month, a copy of the computer bug was being analyzed within a tight-knit community of computer security experts, and it immediately grabbed the attention of Liam Omerku, an operations manager for Symantec, one of the largest antivirus companies in the world.
As soon as we saw it, we knew it was something completely different.
Steve Kroft joins us now. Welcome.
Charlie, good to be here.
Good report. Can you summarize in a simple way how they were able to do this and have that impact on those centrifuges in Iran?
Well, somebody created a virus that was designed to hit one specific target in the entire world, something that had a bunch of a certain configuration of equipment that the computer or the virus was able to determine if it was the right target. This is what it was looking for. Yeah. It's one of the most ubiquitous pieces of machinery in the world. It's called a programmable logic computer, and It's just a piece of plastic with some chips in it, and it controls factory floors all over the world. This will tell you what chemicals and what amounts to put into a product that you're making. It'll tell you when to heat up the plant or cool it down. Could be used, for example, to shut off a cooling system at a nuclear reactor. And it was really the first virus to attack this little piece of equipment. And it was after a certain kind of Siemens equipment.
And by doing that, they were able to affect the centrifuges in Iran at a particular place.
Right. What it did was, it essentially, the virus this sits in between the operators of the plant and the machinery on the floor. And what the virus was able to do was able to get in here, rewrite the software, and tell the machines to do something entirely different without the operators of the plant knowing it.
You spoke in your piece, for people who didn't see it, with retired General Mike Hayden, who of course is also former head of the NSA and the CIA director. There's a little bit more of your interview we didn't see last night. We want to play right now.
Do you think it was an act of war?
I would not call it an act of war. Look, given my own background, Steve, I mean, I've got this whole universe of things between peace and war that are called covert actions. I don't think whoever did this considered it to be an act of war. The Iranians have not quite responded to it as if it were an act of war. It's in that space between the two.
If the United States were involved in this or to become involved in something like this, how high would the authorization have to go?
You're asking a theoretical question.
Right.
I'm going to give you a theoretical answer based upon my experience in government. Something of this nature gets approved in the West Wing.
General Hayden said a lot of things in which he made space between the fact when he was in government making policy and where he is now. Yeah. But he knows a lot of stuff.
He knows a lot of stuff, and he knows a lot of stuff that he can't say. And he was president or director of the CIA for George Bush at a time this would have been green-lighted.
What do they fear the most?
Well, I think that they fear somebody using something like this against us. And the thing that's really interesting about it is that this virus, as General Hayden said, it's not like a conventional weapon that destroys itself along with the target. It's out there for people to copy. So you can actually go online and find the formula for making this, the code.
It's the footprints that Cesar, I think you referred to it, or someone in the report did last night. It really is a Pandora's box that now has been opened.
Right. And somebody else could turn around and modify it and use it against us if they can find the way into our computer system. But this is really an historic thing. I mean, it's going to be a component of war from now on. This was an historic event. And it can be used to disrupt all sorts of things.
The conventional wisdom or the perceived wisdom is that this might have been done by the Israelis, but they could not have done it without U.S. help.
I don't think so. I think that everybody feels that it was mostly a U.S. operation, everybody that we have talked to.
A U.S. operation?
U.S. operation, but obviously there was a lot of intelligence that was picked up on the ground. Somebody knew how this plan operated, and certainly I think the Israelis have proved that they have a bunch of people on the ground there.
Every day, this is how America comes under attack.
This is war. There's no other way to really describe it.
Security firms in Silicon Valley are trying to help the government fight the bombardment of these cyber attacks, which the U.S. intelligence community now says trump terrorism as the #1 threat to the United States. Everything from Social Security numbers to Pentagon secrets is at risk. Mark Mayfrit knows the government's vulnerabilities better than most. As a teen hacker, he was raided by the FBI after successfully breaking into federal computer systems to post anti-government slogans. But more than half the cyber incidents are partly to blame on government employees themselves, who inadvertently click on malicious links or leave their cell phones unattended.
Anything that you're storing on the app can be taken by the attacker.
This hacker at a recent cybersecurity convention in Las Vegas shows how to hack into a federal government application on a stolen cell phone in just minutes.
Once you're at this level of introspection into the app, being able to look into the data, the methods, the entire architecture of the app, you have full control.
And from cyber crime to cyber war. The battle is coming to Moscow, but thankfully it's just a virtual one, so far at least. Top hackers from around the country have had a chance to show off their skills and to compete in a global battle of digital wits. Primetime's Tom Barton goes to investigate.
Just how powerful can a computer be? Two corporations, each with an army of hackers on their side, are going at each other to try and break into each other's systems. Up here on the leaderboard, we see that one hacker named Voss is leading that charge. Let's find out what he thinks about what he's doing.
Writing code is just one of the things that help me to hack. This is not very interesting. The interesting thing is breaking into systems.
We're here at this undisclosed location in the center of Moscow, and I'm surrounded by computer hackers. Some of the most advanced hacking techniques are being used in this simulation. You can see on the leaderboard behind me those scoring points to try and hack into through the security systems of some very advanced fake companies here to try and get through those layers of defense and to see who can win at that. It's organized by Symantec, and with me now is Andrei Vyshlov from Symantec Russia, one of the organizers behind this event. Andrei, it looks very advanced. What are they actually trying to do here?
Well, first of all, I must say, that's the game, so there is nothing wrong is going to happen. But it is true, they are hacking into different systems, trying to get various level of information, and they score points for that. And Symantec has created this game back in US, and we did run it in the US. It's been very successful, so we've taken it out. We did it in UK, in South Africa. We're now doing it in Russia, and the best of the best in Russia will join the next level of international competition.
You've certainly created a very sort of creepy and sinister atmosphere here with the music, with the lights. But if I was a very serious hacker, if I was someone who really wanted to cause some damage, I don't think I would want to show my face in events like this. Do you think that there are some really serious, potentially dangerous hackers here?
Well, I do believe that we've got quite good level of professionals here, but you're right. In order to address the bigger audience, we did have an online game 2 months ago where you didn't have to come, you didn't have to show your face, and we had about 500 registered participants there. So you see that here we have much less people, probably because of that. Some people don't want to be public. But we run the game not only for hackers, we also run the game for the community to make them aware of the issues around the securities of the holes in their systems and the damage the individual or an enterprise can get from such things.
Okay. Well, thank you to Andrei Vyshlov from Symantec. It certainly seems like a very intense atmosphere here. If you were a hacker, I don't know who's going to win, and I don't quite know how they're going to win, but it certainly seems like this is a showcase of some advanced level hacking here in Russia.
I wake up every morning just ecstatic and enthused and challenged and humbled, really, to be their commander and to help support them and lead them in building the next generation of cyber warriors.
There's something about the 39th when you walk in the doors here. We breed a different kind of individual here. They're fighting the war every day on the wire, and we're training them to do that.
We are a moniker of the Air Force here and in small Herbert Field, Florida.
Folks that are going out day to day, going head to head with their adversaries are better because of folks here and the school.
The fact that we are not only a cyber schoolhouse but an information operations schoolhouse on both levels speaks volumes to the 39th.
It's an area of continuous learning, so every day is a game changer.
I know that what I do here will almost directly impact the warfighter.
It's all about defense of the nation. We're producing warfighters. It's probably the coolest part of our mission.
It really gives you a sense of accomplishment, like you really have a purpose, not only for the Air Force but for your country.
The way that cyberspace is headed, I think that'll be very important in the future, and I'm glad to be a part of it.
A serious question from Washington. There are new allegations this morning of a serious breach of American military secrets.
That's right. A confidential report first obtained by the Washington Post says Chinese cyber spies gained access to the designs for dozens of major U.S. weapons systems. David Martin is in Washington. David, good morning. And how serious is this?
Well, it's very serious, Charlie and Nora. This report put together by the Defense Science Board is a veritable who's who of the weapons that will be involved in President Obama's so-called Pacific pivot, where you take the weight of the U.S. military away from the wars of the past decade and move them into the Pacific, where, of course, the main competitor is China. And the report says that the Chinese hackers have gained access to data on a number of these weapon systems, and they include 3 missile defense systems. There's one high-altitude defense system, one low-altitude defense system, and a ship-based defense system. There is a new Navy ship called the Littoral Combat Ship, which just deployed to Singapore. the Marines' Osprey aircraft, which takes off like a helicopter and flies like an airplane, was also compromised, and that is just now being deployed in Japan. And there was the F-18 jet fighter, which is the Navy's primary carrier aircraft. So these are not just any weapons. These are weapons which all have a very specific role in the Pacific pivot and would be of particular interest to China in coming up with ways to counter them.
Why did you charge those members of the People's Liberation Army? You're never going to arrest them.
Oh, never say never. We have many flaws in the FBI because we're human beings, but one of our great strengths is a certain doggedness. We don't ever forget. And so lots of folks like to travel around the world, and given that we don't ever forget, there may be opportunities. We also thought it was very important to send a message to the world and to the good people of China that this activity is going on. And there were points at which the Chinese government had said, well, show us the evidence. So we have it, and we'd actually like to show more in a criminal proceeding in Pittsburgh.
What other country is up there with China in terms of attacking U.S. computers?
Yeah, there are others, but I think that's the one I'm going to stop at that point of the list.
Why don't you want to go on?
Well, for a variety of reasons. I mean, we've made public accusation with respect to the Chinese, so I feel comfortable saying that. We've got a lot of other sensitive operations going on that involve nation-state, multiple nation-states' efforts to get into our systems, both our government systems and our private systems. So I don't do anything to let the bad guys know what I know.
A lot of the cybercrime is coming out of Russia.
This story is about an amazing accomplishment of humanity. Ready? The Nuclear Regulatory Commission is the overseer of the U.S.'s nuclear power industry. They maintain databases that give precise, detailed information about the location and condition of all American nuclear reactors. They keep inventory of weapons-grade nuclear materials. The NRC employs about 4,000 people who work very serious jobs that affect the safety of the entire planet. And according to a new Inspector General report, the NRC's computer system has been hacked 3 times in just 3 years, twice by foreigners and once by an unknown individual. All told, investigators found 17 compromises to the NRC computer systems that occurred between 2010 and 2013. Unknown people around the world have now had access to every detail about every nuclear reactor in the U.S. So yeah, this story is about an amazing accomplishment of humanity, and that it's seriously amazing that somehow we've managed to not blow ourselves up. Yet.